Did you know you have spent 80 cents of your marketing dollar after you have done this one thing? michaelmclean.coach. Let me share a story with you about the late, great David Ogilvy. If you don't know David Ogilvy, he's one of the ad men, the glorious old school ad men, one of the best to ever do it. The old Mad Men movies and documentaries are about men like David Ogilvy. Ogilvy created some of the greatest print advertisements in copywriting and marketing history. He worked for companies like Rolls-Royce and other high-end businesses. Nobody was better at creating advertisements for high-end products than the late David Ogilvy. One of Ogilvy's badass rules that I have written on one of those recipe index cards before I write any copy, before I write an article or a part of my newsletter or a telegram or an email or even shoot a video or do any blog posts whatsoever, I think about David Ogilvy's number one rule. Ogilvy always said, you have spent 80 cents of your marketing dollar when you have done this one thing. And that one thing, my fellow viewer, is creating your headline. The headline for your advertisement, the subject line for your email. A headline for a video is called the hook. You can call these things whatever you want, but they're all headlines. And once you have decided on the headline for your ad, for your website, for your sales page, for your video, for your email, guess what, friend? You have invested already 80 cents. What Ogilvy was saying is 80% of your time and energy and focus should be on the most important part of any advertisement, any post, any email, anything like that. So I disagree. I actually now disagree with David Ogilvy. I believe you've spent 90 cents. And the reason for that is in 2024, attention spans at anywhere from 3 to 7 seconds. Most people are suffering from manufactured mental illness. Most people are lost, scrolling their precious lives away 8+ hours a day on iPhones, suffering from what I call digital dementia. So remember, in a lot of cases, your client is an iPhone junkie, right? You might be selling to the great unwashed general public, and if you are, you have to never underestimate the task at hand. Never underestimate the task at hand. So Ogilvy had it right at 80 cents, and now I say, because of iPhones and digital dementia, then I'm going to say 90 cents. So what does this mean for you as a copywriter, as a marketer, as an advertiser, as a salesperson? It means you gotta spend 80 to 90% of your time on the headline. Whatever it is, the headline for your video, for your sales page, for your ad, whatever it is, the title of your book, the title of your free report, whatever it is that you're selling, you have got to invest 80 to 90 cents of every dollar of every minute in the headline. It basically, Ogilvy was saying, if you don't get the headline right, the rest of it doesn't matter at all. Smart guy. If you don't get the subject line right, if your website doesn't have the right headline, if your video doesn't have the right thumbnail, the hook, if your sales letter doesn't have the right headline, no chance. And this is why Gary Halbert was always talking about his gun to your head principle, where you need to write your headline like somebody has a gun to your head. He wasn't joking. Like him and Ogilvy, these are old school guys. They weren't fucking around like people are today on free email and posting on Flakebook and shooting free videos on BoobTube and all these other toxic swamps where you can get away with being horrible at copywriting and marketing because you don't have any skin in the game. You have to remember, guys like David Ogilvy and Gary Halbert, they invested tens, if not hundreds of thousands over their career, millions of dollars in real advertising. I'm talking about envelopes with stamps. I'm talking about physical print sales letters. I'm talking about print ads in magazines that were $100,000 for one ad. I'm talking about full page newspaper advertisements in the LA Times or the Wall Street Journal. I'm talking about real skin in the game. They couldn't test headlines like we can now, where you send out, a handful of emails and you get data right away. These guys didn't have the World Wide Web. They didn't have anti-social media. These guys were paper and ink tree killing guys. Newspapers, magazines, sales letters. So this is why I only study the old school masters, like David Ogilvy, like Gary Halbert, because those guys, they cut their teeth. They cut their chops. They earned their chops in the copywriting game the old school way. If it didn't work, it could cost them literally, 10 grand, 50 grand, 100 grand. A mistake could be worth $250,000. Back in the 70s, back in the 60s, back in the early 80s. So this is why I have such respect for the old masters, and I don't pay any attention to the new turds that are out there preaching and the fanboys on anti-social media. I don't pay attention to anybody who hasn't cut their teeth in advertising and marketing and copywriting, like the great Dan Kennedy or the great John Carlton or the Gene Schwartzes and you just go down the list. Those guys did it in the toughest arena. Those guys did it in the toughest marketplaces. Today we have it easy. Everybody's a so-called expert today, wet behind the ears. But when you listen to a guy like Ogilvy, and he said this back in the 70s, your headline is 80 cents of your dollar. Man, oh man, you need to be doing. So how do I use that? Very simple. I when I'm writing an ad or I'm writing anything, I sit down with my yellow legal pad. This is all paper and ink, right? I'm not doing this online or anything like that. And I sit down, and it's nothing for me to write between 25, sometimes 50, depends on what it is. If it's a sales letter or it's a magazine ad or a newspaper ad or something where I'm going to be spending real money, it's nothing for me to sit down and write 200 headlines. You might think I'm kidding, right? But I ain't kidding. If I'm just doing, say, an email as an example, my headline, my subject line, I'll take, maybe 10 minutes, but I'll write out like 25 different subject lines, headlines, because it's 90 cents of my dollar. But when I get into the real media, the print media, I will literally take days and days and days. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down. I'm going to write, 50 headlines. I'm going to sleep. I'm going to wake up the next day, write another 25 or 50 headlines. And literally sometimes I have between 150 to 200 headlines. And you know what? It's taken me 22 years of being a serious copywriting student to get to that point. but I do all the how-to scenarios. I follow all the great guys like Ogilvy. But you know what? I only spend then 10% of the rest of the time. 10%. Because I've spent 90 cents, I spend 10% on the rest of the ad. And it's amazing because, you know what? If I don't get the headline right, if it's not gun to my head, like Halbert said, it doesn't matter anyways. Nobody's going to open up one of my boring emails. Nobody's going to watch one of my boring videos. Nobody's going to read one of my boring telegrams. Nobody's going to read one of my boring full-page ads in one of the magazines. They're simply not going to. So I need to invest 80 to 90% of my time and my money, like Ogilvy said, in getting the headline right. If I can't reach out and grab you by the throat, if I can't reach out and interrupt your entertainment, your, scrolling, whatever it's you're doing, family time, if I can't reach out and grab your attention in 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 seconds, then I really don't deserve your viewership. I don't deserve to be able to grab your attention. So that's what's in front of us, and I think that's a really huge, massive pro tip. 80 cents of your dollar is spent after you have decided on the headline for your ad. Man, David Ogilvy was one smart dude. I absolutely love studying his books and his teaching principles. Hello. And man, there's one to take to the bank. Speaking of old school masters, I'm starting up a print newsletter called Badass Copy in February. It's a real print newsletter, just what the world needs, more tree killing. And admittedly, I need to do this like a hole in the head. Mark Andre, my business partner, thinks that I'm suffering from a brain injury here, that I'm going to write another physical newsletter. But copywriting deserves its own newsletter. So what I'm going to be doing each month in Badass Copy is breaking down one of the all-time old school full-page ads. This month in February, when I start the newsletter, I'm going to break down Halbert's greatest ad ever, which was "Stop Murdering Your Money." And every month I'm going to take one of the classics, one of the top 100 ads of all time. They're all direct response. They all sold a product toe to toe, belly to belly, eye to eye, and I'm going to break it down. Plus, I'm going to include in the newsletter everything I've done that month. Our Twitter ads, our Flakebook ads, our YouTube ads, all the stuff that we do business-wise. As you know, I don't participate in any of that shit personally, but those are medias that we can use to build our own company, so I do. But I share with you all my copywriting for my persuasion techniques, my influence techniques, and a big part of what I'm going to share in the first edition is the 3 secrets to shooting videos. Now, you have to remember, like 5 years ago, I wouldn't be out here walking around, and I certainly wouldn't be talking to you. I wanted to be rich, not famous. And I was very uncomfortable in a camera. I didn't like cell phones. I certainly didn't know what a gimbal was, and I didn't want anybody joining me on my precious morning roadwork walks. But then finally, I decided, you know what? I can scale my business, help a lot of people, and live my mission. But you know what, Michael? You can't be a fucking cupcake all the time, and you're gonna have to learn to get good at shooting videos. So what have I done over the last 5 years? I started from being awful, a disaster, a little bit better, mediocre, ordinary. I got to be average, and then I got good, and then I've got to the point now where I can just turn on my phone like this, go for a walk, and talk to you. But it took a long time, and it took practice. I don't have any special skills. I didn't read any special books. But I'm going to share with you in the first edition of Badass Copy.coach I'm going to share with you the 3 things that I use when I turn on press play. Like seriously, when I have my shoes on and I'm ready for my walk, these are the only 3 things that I use in each video. And I just subconsciously and consciously bang through these 3 things. I'm using them right now. 1 and then 2 and then 3. Doesn't matter if it's a 3-minute video or a 30-minute video or an hour. It makes no difference. These are the 3 simple principles to use. So I'll be breaking those down, as well as the Halbert ad in the first edition of badasscopy.coach. The last thing I'll remind you to encourage you to subscribe. It's expensive, by the way. It might not be something you want to add to your monthly fee. It's $300 a month for the physical newsletter. I'll give you a nice fat discount if you sign up today. So it'll be $249 a month. $249 a month. And that's only until I'm done promoting it. But one of the big bonuses I'll throw in if you subscribe to it today at badasscopy.coach is my pal Doberman Dan. I mean, talk about characters, talk about from another planet. I love Doberman. He's my type of guy. He walks a different walk, but he's also one of the top copywriters living today. And I brought Doberman in as a special favor. He did the favor for me. And he did a 2-hour mastermind session with our champions, with my best of the best, with my $30,000 kings, my champions, Bill Gaw, Stephen Ivanko, Paul Nolte, David Linton, Mark Andre, Leanne. And he just basically took us to school for 2 hours. And nobody's ever seen this training except my champion masterminds. And I decided I'm going to cut this up and I'm going to use this as a bonus for anyone that subscribes to badasscopy.coach. It's the ultimate bonus. Like, how can you put a price on something where you bring in a guy who never does this? I mean, Doberman's reclusive. You think that I'm an introvert. You got to see this cat. I mean, he just doesn't do it. He doesn't do seminars. He doesn't do speeches. He just doesn't do it. He just lives in his own world and makes his own money. And, that's his deal. But what's really interesting is nobody's ever seen this training. And when it was over, my champions, they all said the same thing. And I know Mark Andre agreed. They're like, man, that's the best training of the whole 12-month mastermind. And, we have a mixture of guys that some of them, are great experienced copywriters, the best of the best. And we had a couple of guys that are pretty new. And Doberman, man, the stories he was telling about Halbert, they lived together. Gary Halbert he moved in with Doberman Dan in wherever the hell they lived. But just some of the stuff, and Mark Andre wrote this stuff down. And I'm going to read some of it to you. He said, because he went through back the 2-hour training. This is what you're going to get when you subscribe below. Not only do you get the 8 or 12 page print letter, and I'm going to break down Gary's famous Stop Murdering Money ad, and I'm going to include my 3 tips to shooting videos and telling stories. But here's some of the stuff that Doberman talked about in this 2-hour training. I'll send to you. It's a PowerPoint with him on there live with our champions. One of the things was how to attract whale clients instead of freebie seeking mooches. That's a line from Doberman. He hates freebie seeking mooches. And he's all about the big whale, right? He's about less with more. So he wants to make more money with less clients, and that's his blueprint. That's what he does. He makes more with fewer and less. Dan Kennedy's secrets for making 7 figures per year with a list of 17 people. Some people are like, oh, I need this big email list. I need this big mailing list. And here's Kennedy, who doesn't do any social media or any email. And the guy brings in 7 figures a year with 17 private clients on this specific list. And Doberman and Dan are good friends. So again, another great insider story. How to use writer's block to create some of your best money-making copy. This was insane because everybody struggles with the BS of writer's block. And Doberman went through, okay, you don't know what to write about? Here's a trigger that changes everything. And he said, you know, you'll write some of your very best copy. Cult-like mind control copywriting. Hijack your prospect's brain so he cannot pay attention to anything but your message. I don't even know what he's talking about there, but that's pretty great. Life and death persuasion secrets of an ex-cop. You know what Doberman Dan was before he was a copywriter? He was a police officer in Ohio, and he built up a side hustle by being a copywriter. And then when he started making money on the side, he said, that's it, I'm done being a cop. He didn't like being a police officer. He didn't want to do any of that stuff. So he literally changed his life over a few months and just said, that's it, I'm an ex-cop. So but he has that experience. He worked the beat in Ohio, and his stories of working the beat as a cop and dealing with people that had all kinds of mental illness issues, behavioral issues, criminals, psychopaths. And he talked a lot about how that's made him a better marketer. Copy supercharger, the few simple words that he sprinkles into copy after he's written it. After he's written his emails or his sales letter, he goes back and he adds these unusual words, like he sprinkles them through, and it just superpowers his copy. And once he told me that, I see it in all his newsletters and all his websites. I see it now. I didn't see it before. The biggest mistake to avoid that 99% of people make, I used to make it all the time, and how to become a category of 1 so that you have no competition. Artificial stupidity is not a competition. You don't have any competitors if you know this insider secret that Doberman uses. And finally, the most powerful, never before revealed Gary Halbert secret. This isn't anywhere in all the Halbert letters, in some of the videos, in some of the stories. And this was a story from these two guys living together. I think they were living together in, it doesn't matter, one of the islands. And he said, Michael, nobody knows about this story, this copywriting story. And he just kept telling us the Gary Halbert stories during this 2-hour training. So do what you want with that stuff. All I know is this badass copywriting letter is the same as what copywriting's done for me the last 22 years. I didn't even know what the word copywriting meant 22 years ago. Admittedly, I didn't. I didn't know what it was. I thought, is that marketing? Is that promotion? Is that persuasion? What the hell is it? So I studied the top guys, including Carlton and Kennedy and Albert and Schwartz and Doberman Dan. And if you want to know, let me bottom line it for you so you can decide if this monthly print newsletter is for you. It's only going to do one thing for you, okay? If you subscribe to the monthly letter, Badass Copy, here's my mission, and it's very simple. It'll only do the one thing. It'll make you rich as sin, slowly, not fast, slowly, by teaching you the skill of turning words into money. That's all it is. You can sit down, you can write a swimming pool, you can sit down and write a European vacation, you can sit down and write yourself a home gym, you can sit down and write yourself an executive assistant, you can sit down and write yourself a second home, you can sit down and write yourself a new vehicle. That's basically what it is. Anytime we have a big expense now, my wife Krista comes to me with a big expense, I just automatically now just sit down and I write copy that pays for almost all of it, sometimes more, sometimes less. And that's the skill now that I walk around with. So badasscopy.coach. I will break down the famous Halbert ad in the first one, the inaugural edition, the maiden voyage of badass copy. Also, I'll tell you my 3 video camera shooting tips. You may be interested in videos, you may not be. It's not for everybody. You don't have to shoot videos all the time like I do. And we'll put in that 2-hour training from Doberman Dan. The guys paid 30 grand to be part of that mastermind, 30,000, and you'll get that as a free bonus. So do what you want with all this. I'll leave that with you. Just remember the David Ogilvy pro tip. The headline is 80 cents of your marketing dollar. Make sure you're applying 80% of your time, your thinking, and your energy. Whenever you're writing copy or doing direct response marketing, your headline is 80 to 90% of the success or failure of that particular ad. 2 words that changed my life, 2 words that can change yours. Be relentless.